Welcome to the One-Year Book of Mormon. A non-Mormon reads through the Book of Mormon. 2 Nephi, chapter 11. Chapter overview. This is a short chapter, and it mostly consists of Nephi making an interlude between Jacob's speech and his upcoming quoting of Isaiah, which is 13 solid chapters of Isaiah, I kid you not. In verse 2 he says, "And now I, Nephi, write more of the words of Isaiah, for my soul delighteth in his words." But how many times does he or another Book of Mormon author claim that he can't or won't write for one reason or another? Including in verse 1 here, where he says he won't write more of what Jacob said because what he's written is good enough. But then, what does he do? But he starts laboriously and slowly writing and engraving Isaiah, 13 chapters, onto metal plates because he likes Isaiah's words, even though they already have them on the brass plates. And remember back in 1 Nephi 6, in which Nephi refuses to give his genealogy, with the justification being that it's not necessary for him to give his genealogy because it exists on the brass plates. So he doesn't need to give his genealogy, which is on the brass plates, but he does need to give Isaiah, even though he has them on the brass plates. He needs to laboriously engrave and scrape and scratch each single word into metal, even though they already exist in metal form and cannot be corrupted or done away with. Really? Verse 7 is worth noting. "For if there be no Christ, there be no God. And if there be no God, we are not. For there could have been no creation. But there is a God, and he is Christ, and he cometh in the fullness of his own time." In the context, this seems to be another affirmation of modalism, in which God is said to be Christ, not that there are three gods, as modern Mormonism affirms, nor that there are three persons in the one being of God, which is the Trinitarian position that Christianity holds. So this verse goes against both Christianity and Mormonism. Yet another place where modern Mormonism disagrees with the Book of Mormon. Further, this verse must have implications for how Mormons believe the universe started. In Christianity, of course, we start with God, who creates everything, and this also comports with what the Book of Mormon says. However, Mormonism in its later scriptures teaches that matter is eternal, as are what they call intelligences. Think of it as sort of a soul or a pre-soul. It's the essence of what makes you, you. And Mormonism teaches that it cannot be created or destroyed and that it has always existed, just like matter has always existed. Since at least 1844, with the preaching of the King Follett funeral discourse, which was preached just a few months before Joseph Smith's untimely death, Mormons have believed that God wasn't always God, but progressed to become a God. In the words of a famous couplet dating to that era and quoted throughout the years since by Mormons, "As man is, God once was. As God is, man may become." So if our current God, which the Mormons call Elohim or Heavenly Father, was once a man who became a God, the question becomes, how did Heavenly Father become a God? Traditionally, the answer from Mormons has been that the being they call Heavenly Father had a Heavenly Father himself. Our Heavenly Grandfather is how Brigham Young and others from that era styled it. But of course, that God also needed to have a God himself to raise him to godhood, and the cycle continues ever backwards. This leads non-Mormons to ask, how did the first God become God? After all, if each God needs to have a pre-existing God to raise him to godhood, then either 1, there must be an infinite regression so that there is never a first God, which is what Mormons really hold, or 2, there must be a first God who was always God. Of course, this sounds like the Christian position, except not that there are multiple gods who are raised to godhood equal to God. Or 3, there must be a first God who was a man who became God without a God before him. The first view, as I said, is what Mormons hold, yet it is actually illogical, so we can discard that. The second view, Mormons would disagree with because it is the Christian view of God. Although actually in modern times, Mormons have had to face some of the problems with their beliefs. They haven't really been confronted with them before, so they haven't really needed to struggle with these implications. The rise of the internet has helped to make that easier. And so some Mormons are coming more to this belief, believe it or not. And the third view, that there was a man who became a god as the first god, would be contradicted by this verse, because it says, if there be no God, we are not, for there could have been no creation. In other words, man cannot exist without a God to create him. So there could be no man who became the first God. And this remains a major problem for Mormonism.